Hey there, how's it going, Darshan?
Oh my God, it's been chaos, hasn't it? It's just starting
So
out,
busy.
and it's been 3 weeks, I think, since the Trump administration started, and everything's in chaos, and we get to talk about the chaos. So our job is to pick up the pieces.
Yep. First things first, what we first saw come out of this administration, truly, I think it was priority number one for them, at least, or at least that's how it appears to us, is removing DEI from any type of, federally funded or federally endorsed programs. Now, why does that matter to the clinical trial industry?
The Trump administration has taken a bit of a heavy-handed approach. This is not me bashing the administration. It's
No.
just they've kind of gone in more with the we think diversity is the antithesis
Mhm.
of merit-based. And for whatever argument that has, I think at this moment, from a pure scientific perspective, I think you have certain concerns. Specifically, when you are designing a clinical trial, what you're looking at is making sure that your patients in your clinical trial are representative of the patients you're going to see and treat with that drug or medical device. The moment you land up in a scenario where those patients are not being represented and you're still going to use the drug or device on those patients, you're going to land up in a scenario where you don't actually know if that drug or device works, and that's a problem. So, from a pure scientific basis, we there are reasons to do this. Now, there are actual drugs out there that were approved only for a specific
Mhm.
race. I believe there was a drug called Bidel going back, I want to say 10, 15 years. And I think, if I remember correctly, it was only or primarily indicated or approved for African Americans, if I remember correctly, which I thought
Yep.
was a really fascinating discussion.
Well, and we've seen the opposite happen too. I don't know that most people understand, even when you're looking at global clinical trials today, right now, while we're making strides otherwise, and we worked hard on it in 2025, if you look back at the most recently available data in 2024, you will see the most prevalent patient in any clinical trial across any indication, across any geographical location is a white male. We're making strides, but that has categorically and historically been true, and it still unfortunately is today. We're making great, great, great strides. We're definitely seeing women be more participants, and we're definitely seeing, the BIPOC community join in that. But overwhelmingly, most of our currently approved drugs and devices were predominantly studied on white American or European males, and that's just not indicative of the population that necessarily is the patient using them. That those are not the same populations. And so that's where I get concerned of, do people understand that? It's the same way I think of it, having had a kid, what I could take when I was pregnant all depended on what pregnant women research showed was safe and not safe. And that's a very difficult population to do research with and on. And so thus we don't have a lot of information. And it's very frustrating to be in that position where you're a very certain type of patient and you just don't know if something's safe for you, and
And
you don't know if something's allowable or accessible for you.
overall, the direction that we've been taking medicine for the last, I want to say 10, 15 years, is in personalization. This idea that we want your medicine to work for you. The only way we know that is by testing on what
You.
constitutes you.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So the reason for the diversity is not feel good. The
Right.
reason for the diversity is I need to know it works so that when
Right.
I put it in you, you have the best outcome we can get. You were talking about pregnant women. And I think a lot of the data on pregnant women, unfortunately or fortunately, has come out of off-label uses of drugs. And as much as we think that that's okay, the fact is that off-label uses
That's studied.
are dangerous because it means
Mhm.
you're going to have certain failures, and if you don't want to have failures on patients who are for women who are actually giving birth if you can avoid
Right.
it, because you want to avoid that thalidomide controversy
Right.
where kids were born with flipper
I
limbs.
think the other piece that I'm hearing from our community right now truly is the impact. So let's go down this road. Let's say this diversity guidance is off the table and remains off the table, that it's not something that is rescinded, changed, brought back in some capacity. What does that really mean for the day to day folks who are executing protocols, activating trials, who are at the IRB, reviewing them?
The key portion to this, number one, is remember, a guidance is just that, a guidance. It's
Right.
non-binding. It never was binding to start
Right.
off with. Whether it's final, whether it's draft, it was never
Right.
binding. So your diversity action plan was really the FDA's current thinking on something.
Right.
The fact that the FDA took it off the website makes it no more binding or less binding than it was before. So I see people trying to like hoard these guidances going, oh, I now have a copy of something that the FDA is not putting out. Okay, that doesn't change anything. You can continue to make sure conceptually that the needs of patients are met.
Right.
Now, what this does translate into is yesterday, day before, I think I saw a note from the US Attorney's Office, and they are actually saying that we're going to prosecute for private companies who, for example, may be receiving government funding or the like. And remember, the word government funding can be really broad
Yep.
because you might be looking at some kind of grants or the like, which a lot of sponsors take, which a lot of academic institutions take. And they're saying that we'll either stop funding, we'll prosecute for discrimination. And that's the problem you're starting to face. This idea that whether or not you do this at a practical level at your site, if you land up looking like you are discriminating, even if there's a really good scientific reason to do it, is the risk worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze? And I expect that for a certain period, until the dust settles down, companies are going to step back, wait to see exactly what people are prosecuting for, and then go back in.
And I also think it's going to be what type of funding you're talking about. I mean, if you are an academic medical center that relies a lot on federally funding in addition to industry, I mean, you're going to have to pull this way back and think in a very different way, given the jurisdiction the federal government has over that research, versus if I'm a site working with almost exclusively non-federally or state-funded research, it's really up to the individual sponsors that I'm working with and what their stance is and what their appetite for risk with the federal government is.
But I would ask you that question. I don't fully know because we don't really have clarity on how aggressive the federal government is going to be. Do they see this as discrimination and they go even after sites that don't actually have federal funding? The argument that it's discrimination by itself. And I guess you then have to define the word discrimination.
Do they have jurisdiction to do that? Do they have the jurisdiction to do that is then the next question, which is a whole nother podcast.
Right, exactly right. Exactly right.
Well, I think we've unpacked this for now. I was going to say this is going to be something that's going to be very interesting to keep eyes on as we're seeing, you know, on a daily and hourly basis. We've already seen some things that have been removed from the FDA website, put back on, or at least ordered to be. So I think this is very much going to be changing and a topic we're going to have to continue to explore. But I really appreciate you sitting here and talking me through this.
Thank you so much.
Always.
But call, click, or email.